In this session is we're sort of on target now, starting slightly before 11:30, which is great. And on an International Day of Solidarity, I think this is a really fitting session that I know a lot of people are looking forward to looking at in this all together. Ireland, Portugal and Greece. I'm just here really to introduce Andy Robinson, who will then moderate the session and open up some discussion between the speakers before we throw it out to a wider discussion on the floor, at which stage I'll come back in. So without further ado, just to introduce Andy, who is... no, he's not. Reporter. He's an international reporter, that's important, for the Barcelona daily La Vanguardia, and he's also written with The Guardian, The New Statesman and The Nation in New York. So with that, I'll hand over to Andy, who will moderate the speakers and also introduce them. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mary. For my newspaper, I was a couple of weeks ago at the IMF G20 summit in Washington, where Christine Lagarde, the new managing director of the IMF, basically said quite clearly that she felt that they had completely run out of macroeconomic ammunition and didn't really know what to do, and quoted Latvia as the model for the way forward in the Eurozone after a 25% drop in GDP in Latvia. So, looks like Ireland may be also becoming a model for countries like Spain. And so, I say that because it's very nice to be at an event with economists who actually have solutions to the grave crisis that we're in at the moment, like Stuart, Holland, who has been hammering away against the deflationary orthodoxy that's been coming out of the European Commission and the Bundesbank for about 20 years. He wrote the draft of the Jacques Delors' white paper in the mid-90s, in which he actually put forward a Keynesian alternative, Euro bonds, a European Investment Bank designed to boost investment and push up aggregate demand. When at that time it was it was basically pushed aside. It's now back on the agenda in a big way. It's now, the issues like Eurobonds are now on the op-ed pages of the Financial Times. So Stuart's moving towards the mainstream. Same with Jamie Galbraith. Jamie Galbraith is now having to wage the same battles as his father did against a sort of depressionary orthodoxy. It's amazing that we could be seeing history repeat itself like this. And Tom, I've read his, and I'm actually covered in La Vanguardia, the stuff that Task has been doing to try and develop some kind of progressive alternative to the disastrous policies that are being pursued at the moment. So I'll hand over to Stuart, and I'm sure he'll give a good summary of his New Deal proposal.
Well, thank you very much, Andy. Is my friend Conor Pyle here? No? No, I hadn't seen him. He said he would come. I just wondered whether he was being shy, which would be out of character. Okay, I don't like PowerPoint. We had a lecturer who came to Coimbra, where I'm based at the moment, and he was asked, would he have a PowerPoint? He said, no. All power corrupts. PowerPoint corrupts. Absolutely. And I'm a very self-indulgent person. If I don't have some discipline like this, I will simply flow, and maybe you'll miss some of the main points. So here we go. Hope it works. Okay, cutting the Gordian knot on debt. Parallel twin strategies. Then stabilization by union bonds and growth from Eurobonds, and then making a reality of the European Recovery Programme. The European Union is nominally committed to a European Economic Recovery Programme. You don't hear much of this, but they all seriously decided it in 2008. But this will be savaged, it is being savaged, by the current round of cuts and austerity, unless this is countered by a broad wave of EU-financed investments. Not least because negative fiscal multipliers could double the direct cuts in deficits, and negative investment multipliers could treble them. There's no debate on this. I must not get too distracted, but we have Trichet, departing from the European Central Bank, who's an engineer. We have Madame Merkel, who is a physicist. These people are trained to think that there are finite solutions to problems. You do X and Y and you get Z. You don't in real-world circumstances. What's needed to cut the Gordian knot, nonetheless, is rather German. It's a Gestalt shift and a recognition that while EU member states are deep in debt, the EU itself has next to none. It had none at all until May last year, when the European Central Bank began to buy up tranches of some member states' national debt. If the EU were to issue its own bonds to finance a New Deal-style economic recovery, it would be starting from less than a tenth of the borrowing base of the Roosevelt administration in the 30s. That was about 13% of GDP. The EU has got EU's debt since the European Central Bank started buying up national and corporate debt is less than 2%. Union bonds which are not traded, key point, but held in its own debit account. Please read that word as debit, not just debt. 2, recovery through Eurobonds. A social investment-led recovery, because you're not going to get a private market recovery when no one is growing or you're in recession. Funded, like the US New Deal, by borrowing to invest through net issues of Eurobonds which are traded and would attract inflows from sovereign wealth funds and central banks of the emerging economies. Now, in 1989, Jacques Delors requested my help to devise instruments, financial instruments, to make a reality of the Single European Act on economic and social cohesion. Don't hear much of that now at the moment. But there are 2 pillars to the first revision of the Rome Treaty in 1986 in the Single European Act. One was the internal market of 1992, and the other was economic and social cohesion. In the interim and final reports, I proposed union bonds, and he included them in his full employment white paper of December 93. Now, the key parallel, which he did not bring into his white paper, but the key parallel in my argument, which was published before the white paper, was with US Treasury bonds, which don't count against the debt of American states such as California or Delaware. Therefore, union bonds need not count on the debt of EU member states. So the New Deal parallel was not made in the white paper, which meant that a major legitimation of the case for bonds was lost. It lacked resonance with a wider public. The proposal of union bonds just seemed another damn arcane European financial instrument of some kind. Cole thought that a bond was something paid for by German taxpayers, which is among the reasons why he initially opposed them. The bonds were to have been issued by a European Investment Fund, the EIF. I proposed it under that name. I wanted it to be a European monetary fund, but not a European IMF. So I called it a European Investment Fund to focus on investment. It's now part of the EIB group, but with a very limited remit to assist small and medium enterprises. At the 1994 Essen European Council, only the Netherlands and Luxembourg explicitly supported the case for bonds. Both Germany and France were opposed. Others were uncommitted. Once Germany and France had said we're opposed, the others didn't make their case. So the case went by default. But this is a major reason why EU member states are now faced by default. The way to cut the knot is to convert a major share of it to the EU in a European bond, which I would now call, as Delors' bonds were called, union bonds. I've recommended this since 2009, several of the actors involved, including Jean-Claude Juncker, who supported the bonds since they were first proposed in 1993. Parallel proposals will be made by others, including the Bruegel Institute in Brussels. Eurozone net debt of up to 60% of GDP, that's the so-called Stability and Growth Pact, it's a stability negative growth pact, should be converted to the EU. The Bruegel Institute proposals are those being currently considered by finance ministers, but they have key limits, which is why neither ECOFIN nor the European Council have been able to agree them. They assume that debt will be traded, would need a new institution, would mean joint and several liability for what they call blue bonds, converted to be held by the Union, calls for a standardized collective action clause, and need guarantee by all member states, plus arguing for so-called orderly default, which is illusory. None of the above 6 conditions for the Bruegel proposal are necessary. None. Converted debt need not be traded. It could simply be converted and held in its own debit account by the Union. 2, member states' share of the debt could be serviced by them from their national tax revenues without the need for national guarantees by other member states or fiscal transfers. Joint and several liability, which Bruegel proposes, and a standardized collective action clause, therefore, also would not be needed. A debt conversion, therefore, doesn't need what the buyouts that the ECB has been doing since May last year. This is not working, it's not placating markets. There are several estimates it could cost up to 3 trillion. The conversion could be a simple transfer into an untraded debit account, nor does it need joint guarantees or fiscal transfers. Now, why? What's the argument? What's the precedent? The precedent is staring them in the face, but they don't see it, which is why I make the case for a Gestalt shift. It's the European Investment Bank has issued its own bonds for 50 years, without national guarantees or fiscal transfers or buying up national debt, and it's already twice as large as the World Bank. The criteria for the debt conversion would be a ratio of remaining national debt to GDP. This could be done by enhanced cooperation. Enhanced cooperation in principle is by a minority of member states, but the euro creation was de facto a majority enhanced cooperation. Germany, Austria, the Netherlands and Finland could keep their own bonds. In principle, the management of the converted debt could be by the ECB, but this would be opposed by Germany. But the instrument which could do it is the European Investment Fund, which I designed for that, which Delors set up, which is now within the European Investment Bank Group, and it could do it. You don't need a new institution. There should be a clearer distinction between conversion of a share of national debt and net issues of Eurobonds. The net issues of Eurobonds will be purchased by central banks of the emerging economies and sovereign wealth funds. The BRICS have made plain they want to diversify out of the dollar. Even the European Financial Stability Facility has made 2 issues of euro-denominated bonds of 5 billion. They were snapped up immediately by the emerging economies and by Japan. This would take the strain off the dollar, the issues of Eurobonds. With the issues of Eurobonds, the euro would become a global reserve currency. Both the US and the trade surplus economies will gain if this is part of a European recovery program. The US would not gain if it is not part of a European recovery program, because, well, for self-evident reasons. Who should hold the Eurobonds? In my argument, the European Investment Fund. That was set up in order to do it. I'm running out of time. The EIFs, unlike a once-off conversion of a share of national bonds to the Union, the net issue of Eurobonds would be incremental. The European Investment Fund could do it partly because it's part of the European Investment Bank Group, which has been issuing bonds successfully for 50 years. I think that's probably the essence of... the other thing is the criteria. I'll just end on this. Thanks to a proposal which I made to Antonio Guterres, then Prime Minister of Portugal, the EIB has been remitted since 1997 to invest in health, education, urban renewal, urban environment, also new high-tech startups and green technology. You don't need a treaty revision for any of this. You don't even need a European Council decision on the criteria. You would need a European Council decision that, or ECOFIN decision, that the European Investment Fund should issue bonds. The EIB, it's because of these new criteria, health, education, urban renewal, etc., that the European Investment Bank is now more than twice the size of the World Bank. It's successfully invested in the social domain. in the social sphere and thus in economic and social cohesion. Thank you.